All right, here we are. It's Monday with Jesus. It is Monday night. We are kind of slipping behind again, but what can we say? We are here, and we have another great story for you this evening from the Gospel of Luke. All right, and this is for the week after Christmas, the day after Christmas. Yeah, the 26th, this coming Sunday.
Yep.
So tell us the story, Tom.
Great story.
Yep.
So, this is the end of the stories of Jesus' youth, of his birth and youth in Luke. Now, his parents used to go up every year to Jerusalem for the festival, the Passover. And when the boy Jesus was 12 years old, they went up as usual for the festival. And when it was concluded, they started for home. But the boy Jesus stayed behind and his parents in Jerusalem. But his parents didn't know it. And so thinking that he was in the group of the travelers, they went a full day's journey and started looking for him among their friends and relatives. When they didn't find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers. And he was asking questions and listening to them. And everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and at his answers. But his mother said to him, "Young man, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been looking for you with great anxiety." And Jesus said to her, "Why were you searching for me? Didn't you know that I must be in my Father's house?" They did not understand what he was saying to them. So he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. And his mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus grew in wisdom and in years and in favor with God and with people.
All right, thank you. Okay, so this story about Jesus as a 12-year-old. Do we have any other stories about Jesus? We have a couple of versions of him as a baby, or maybe one's he's a baby and one he's about 2, I guess. Do we have any other stories in the gospel tradition about Jesus?
This is it.
This is it. Okay, that's all we got.
And it's important, I think, to notice that he's 12 years old. So this is the turning, this is the coming of age story. This is not a story of him as a little boy, as it is often portrayed, that he's a boy. He isn't a boy. He's a young man.
Yeah, and especially in 2,000 years ago, people didn't live as long. So
Right.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting because you did usually, I think most of our biblical translations have Mary saying child, but you said young man. So what is the word there? I mean, is that a fair translation you're making?
The word is teknon, which is a general word for children, but it's also used for young folks, young men. So probably its dominant meaning most frequently is a child, but it also means a young man. Technon.
Okay. All right. So backing up to the beginning of the story, it establishes the kind of context, the spatial context that says that every year Mary and Joseph went up to Jerusalem. Now they lived in Nazareth, which is in Galilee, right? And
Right.
Jerusalem was actually south in Judea. So how is it that they're going up to Jerusalem?
Well, it's because the normal route was to go from Nazareth over and cross the Jordan and go down to Jericho on the other side of the Jordan, because that was Samaritan territory on the west bank. And then they would go, Jericho is the lowest place on the earth. So it's like 100 something below sea level. And Jerusalem is like at 5,000 feet. So to go from Jericho to Jerusalem, you have to go up. It's a long slog going up to Jerusalem. And so you went up to Jerusalem whenever you came, wherever you came from, and you'd go down from Jerusalem to Jericho and back up to, back up to Galilee.
Okay, so they get to Jerusalem, they do what they came there to do, and then they leave. And I gather, well, there's a reference to friends and relatives. They must be traveling. I'm trying to imagine this in a group of people, and they just assume Jesus is with him, with them. So I guess, and that's kind of another sign that he was not a little child.
Young man. Right.
Yeah, that he had the freedom to move about and not necessarily, I don't know, be right there for dinner, or maybe at dinner times when they realized he wasn't there. So they were trying to find him, and then they have to go back a day's journey, and then they spend 3 more days looking for him.
Yep.
So Mary is, I can just imagine, what she's feeling. One time I lost my 3-year-old son in a huge crowd, and I was totally panicked. I mean, I completely lost it. So I can just imagine what she's feeling. And I assume especially if we're telling a story, it's okay to get in touch with those, maternal or paternal feelings of missing your child, even if your child is 12 years old.
Well, especially if he's 12 years old, they'd be really ticked that he wasn't.
Yeah, that too.
Didn't even think about, them.
Yeah.
He was a fully capable young adult.
Right.
And so, he was making this decision on his own, and
right. And that's
not
what
paying
she's
attention,
right.
not thinking about them at all.
Right. So that's what she says, right? Why have you?
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
I got to close this door.
Okay. The dog is scratching at the door on both our doors, I think.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay. So she's very upset. And then he's really cool, isn't he? He just says, didn't you know I'd be in my father's house? Referencing the temple, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They found him in the temple.
I have to get the dog. Excuse me. Come on, get in here, Tippy.
Tippy wants to get into the act.
Yeah, she does. Right. Where was I? All right. So he's with
he's with a group of travelers.
right, and
No, he's not.
He's with the talking to the elders, correct?
Right.
In the temple.
Yep. So the rabbis had classes in the temple and discussion groups and so on. So people would gather around the rabbis and discuss things. So he was joining the adults in those conversations.
Right. another indication that he was a young man, not a little boy.
Yeah.
And he
right.
was asking them questions, but apparently he was also giving them answers because they were
Right.
amazed at his answers. Yeah. And what's the remind me how it is that his parents respond when they see him doing this, other than being ticked and
Well,
angry?
child, they young man, why have you treated us like this?
Yeah.
we've
And he
been searching for
explains,
you
and
for
then
3
so then he explains, but they don't understand what he's saying.
Right.
And when you told it this time, that really caught my attention, because there's been a lot of times, well, there's sort of a motif about the disciples often not understanding, not getting it,
Right.
things he's saying. But I also feel the same way sometimes with some of these things that Jesus says in the Gospels. I find myself, not understanding what he's saying. So,
Right.
yeah. Well, now I've been learning, and I think, the Old Testament scripture for the same upcoming Sunday, when this story is going to be told or read, is the story of Hannah and Samuel when he's young.
Right.
And it's really interesting, the parallel at the ending. Because both in Samuel, the last little statement in that portion of the story is that he grew in years and in stature, and in favor with both God and with people. And it's a very similar line for Jesus here. So it seems like there's a connection between this story and then the story of Samuel.
Right. So the other story about a young man, in the case of Samuel, a boy, who was, in the tradition, probably the story of David and Goliath is implied that David is a young man, but he probably wasn't 12. He was probably 16, 18, something like that. So the allusion to Samuel sets Jesus' story for his audience who recognized. Luke assumes that his listeners will recognize that connection, and that Jesus was like Samuel, and was in the tradition then of the prophets, who were uniquely connected with God.
Mary is a key character in this story, as she is in a number of the stories in the beginning of Luke. And there's a line at the end of the story that's similar to, I think, the line at the end of the birth narrative, that she treasured all these things, or she pondered all these things in her heart, or held all these things. I'm not quite sure which word you used. How do you understand that phrase?
Yeah, well, I did a little research on that. The root word in Greek is diatereo, which has the meaning. It's used twice prior to this story. One's in Genesis 37, that after he told his brothers and his father his dreams, they were jealous of him and his words, but that his father kept these things, kept them in mind. It's usually translated, kept these matters in mind. Same with Daniel, that his visions terrified, he says, as for me, Daniel, these visions terrified me, but I kept these matters in my mind. So the tradition of this word is the tradition of continuing to think about things, to hold them in mind, hold them in memory, in Mary's case, and to, roll them over, to think about them, to hold them. The basic meaning of suntebreo is to hold, and so treasured is it's a perfectly good translation, but it means to hold it in mind, and that she was then holding all these things in her mind. And
there's a sense of intentionality about that.
right.
Yeah, right.
And that she recognized that something unusual was happening, but that she didn't fully understand, and was honoring this. And this is also the most, I don't know, human characterization of Mary as a mother, where she's, says, young man, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you with great anxiety. So, she's ticked.
You get an inside view of her emotional state.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Are there implications of the story for ministries of peace and justice?
Always. And in this case, the implication is that we need to pay attention to young people, to adolescents. One of the major problems that we have in this country is that we do not give adequate attention to young people. This, in part, grows out of traditions in the ancient world. The ancient world really had no concept of childhood. That was one of the results of the development of literacy and of teaching children to read and write, and that took many years. And so the development of the understanding of childhood has been a relatively, something in the last 1,000 years, 500 more likely, when literacy began to be more widely extended. But in this case, the issue is that we need to treat young people to develop systems that will protect them and enable them to grow and mature in stature, in understanding, so that their minds and their bodies are able to grow in a peaceful and constructive way.
Right. I kind of think that the corporate world has learned to pay attention to young people as consumers. A lot of advertising is directed at them, but that's not the same thing as what you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm talking about justice systems.
Yeah, yeah, to nurture them. And
one of the issues is, should people who are 14, 15 be treated as adults in the courts? And that concept is gradually being eroded, and more young people are being tried and condemned when they're 14, 15, sometimes for horrendous crimes. But a justice system needs to protect and recognize that young people are in the process of development.
Okay, well, that's it for this week. Thanks for joining us. Have a wonderful, wonderful Christmas, blessed Christmas, and enjoy.
And remember the young man Jesus.
Yeah, remember the
growing up.
Jesus. Right.
Great story.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.